Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very excited to be here. I'm Roberto Ramírez with the Census Bureau, and I'm also joined by the director of the census, Robert Santos, who also will be speaking to you all shortly after I present. So, I have a lot of exciting data to share with you today. I'm going to be provide you a demographic and socioeconomic characteristics profile, if you will, of the Latino population. Not only the total Latino population, but I'm also going to talk a little bit about all the different countries of origin and nationalities that compose and make up the Hispanic population in the U.S. So before I get started, I really want to thank Claudia for we have been collaborating over the last year and a half very closely, and she's absolutely right. Demography data is destiny, and it's particularly happening with the Latino population. And it's also truly an honor to be here with such distinguished guests here at the UN, truly a dream come true for me. I also want to say real quickly that I'm substituting for Mercedes Rios. Unfortunately, she had to go back to DC, and so I'm filling big shoes today, so thank you for having me. And lastly, as you can see and tell, I tend to be a little chatty. But I've been under the weather the last few weeks, so I'm a little winded, so we're going to go through these slides nice and slowly so I'll give you a nice profile of all its stats. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started, please. So next slide. Okay, so probably wondering what's happening in the United States, aren't you? You want to know the size of the Hispanic population, the growth, et cetera, and what happened in the last recent census that we conducted in the 2020 census. So let me tell you. Next slide, please. So, starting out with some history, the Census Bureau has been collecting data on the Hispanic origin since 1970. This slide shows the Hispanic population in millions from 1970 to 2060, as you can see here from left to right. If you look at the light blue bars on the left side of the graph, these bars represent census counts from 1970 to 2010. And in 1970, the Hispanic population in the United States was estimated about 9.6 million. Based on a most recent census in 2020, shown by the green bar in the middle of the graph, we counted 62.1 million Latinos in the country in 2020. This means that the Hispanic population grew by 547% between 1970 and 2020. The dark blue bars on the right-hand side are population projections of the Hispanic population decades from now. And they're based on our latest projections that were released a couple of months ago, using the 2020 census as a population base. These projections are based on varying assumptions of future fertility, mortality, and net international migration rates. As you can see, it's projected that the Hispanic population will increase to about 98 million by the 2060. About 1 in 3 residents will be of Latino origin by the year 2060. Next slide, please. As we saw in the previous slide, the 2010 Hispanic population was about 50.5 million, and in 2020 increased to 62.1 million, adding about 11.6 million Latinos in the 2020 census in the last decade. Meanwhile, the non-Hispanic population added about 11.1 million during the same time period. And if you look at the percent change between 2010 and 2020, the Hispanic population grew by 23% since 2010 to 4.3%. This was about 5 times larger than the non-Hispanic population. So is that a little bit better? Okay. Overall, slightly about half of the total U.S. population growth between the last decade, between 2010 and 2020, was attributed to the Hispanic population growth. Okay, next slide. If you haven't been to our website at www.census.gov, we have some fantastic data visuals up there that we produced in the last 2020 census. Here's an image of a data visual that we have, and it's illustrating this is basically a screenshot of our data visualization, race and ethnicity in the United States, which represents racial and ethnic composition and geographic distribution and population size of each of the racial and ethnic groups and their percent change. The bars on the left-hand side show the 50 states and DC ranked by Hispanic population from highest to lowest. Keep in mind that these screenshots don't allow you, I don't have all the states listed here, but just to give you a little preview. As shown on this slide, in the 2020 census, we found that 1/5, about 18.7% of the total population of states identified as Hispanic. States where Hispanics comprise at least 1/4 of their population, 25% or more, were states like Florida, Texas, California, and Arizona, as you can see here, illustrated by the dark blue on the left-hand side, and of course, and by the map here in the southwestern part of the United States. And New Mexico actually being the state with the highest percent Hispanic, but nearly half the population is Latino origin, at 47.7%. Interestingly to note, also, Florida is the only state outside of southwestern part of the United States with a very significant large population of Hispanic population, as you can see here, and largely composed of the Cuban population, of course. Next slide. Okay. This slide shows the percent change of the Hispanic population by state. As I mentioned before, the Hispanic population grew over the last decade, about 23% since 2010. And on the left-hand side of the slide, you can see change by states, including DC and Puerto Rico. Once again, keep in mind that these screenshots are not showing all the states. North Dakota was the only state where the Hispanic population more than doubled in 2010, growing about 148% since 2010. Now remember, South Dakota also had a very small population base, Hispanic population, of, less than 100,000. So it's just something to keep in mind. An additional 9 states also grew by 50% or more since 2010, starting with the lowest to highest from Maryland at 55%, West Virginia, Kentucky, Maine, Montana, New Hampshire, Tennessee, Louisiana, and Vermont all experiences changes about, as you can see here, about 40% and higher. So what is that saying? What does that mean? We're seeing growth all over the country, not just in the typical states in Florida and also in Texas, but all over the country, and we're very excited about that. All right, so in the next few slides now, I'm going to talk to you about a very exciting new project that product that we just released. In fact, it was back in September. That's going to highlight the specific nationalities and ethnicities that comprise of the Hispanic population. Hispanic population is not necessarily a monolithic group that's just composed in one group, as you know. Many of you know that it's comprised of many different Latino groups, Mexican, Colombian, Venezuelan, et cetera. And so that's what we're going to do right now. So let's go to the next slide, please, real quickly. Okay, so this slide here shows the count of selected Hispanic population groups listed from largest to smallest on the left-hand side. The Mexican population was the largest detailed group, as you can see, at 35.9 million counted in 2020, followed by the Puerto Ricans, who continue to be the largest Hispanic population group at 5.6 million. In 2010, Cubans were the third largest group, but in 2030, the actual Salvadorian population now, as you can see, is the largest population group in the country. And of course, you can see also the corresponding counts through all these groups here. Highly recommend you come visit our website. Today, my job, just to give you a little flavor of all the data that is available free at our website. Okay, so let's keep going because I know I'm on a time limit, and I want to make sure all the presenters also get their time too. But before, actually, if you can go back, I do want to emphasize here, if you can see in the middle of the slide, you can see the Venezuelan population actually grew by 181% as well over the last decade over the last decade. Okay, so next slide, please. So this slide here shows the detailed Hispanic origin groups with a population of 1 million or more listed in the 2020 census, from largest to smallest. In the 2020, the Colombian and the Honduran population passed the 1 million mark for the first time. 8 detailed groups of populations of 1 or more, Mexican, as you can see here, Puerto Rican, Salvadorian, Cuban, Dominican, Guatemalan, and Colombian. You can see here, Honduran, all over 1 million apiece. Okay, next slide, please. And then here, this slide shows the percent distribution of the Hispanic population. And what's interesting to note here, if I can draw your attention to the left-hand side of the graph, you can see that back in 2010, the Mexican origin population comprised about 63% of the total Latino population. But guess what? It's dropped, as you can see here, right? 57.7%. And why is that? That's because all the other Latino groups are growing. So its share of the total Hispanic population is dropping. And what's increasing is that you see the Colombian, the Guatemalan, Dominican, they're still smaller populations, but they're comprising a larger and larger share of the total population. This is the future, by the way. This is what's happening on the ground. And this is happening now. Okay. This slide here shows the second largest groups. I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but I just want to highlight one of the interesting features of the data visuals that we have is that you can also look at the largest and second largest groups here. Mexican, of course, being the second largest in most states here. Excuse me, this is the largest group by detailed origin. And if you go to the next slide, we also have it for the second largest. And you see a little bit more diversity here throughout the states. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, so all the information that I just shared with you is coming from the decennial census that we administer, we conduct once every 10 years. We've been doing a census in our country since the founding of our country, since 1790 and on. Now I'd like to shift gears a little bit and talk about data coming from our American Community Survey, which is our flagship survey. It takes a sample of housing units. It's not counting every housing unit, it's taking a sample. But this is where we get and obtain all the socioeconomic characteristic data. Many of you are very interested in. I was actually perusing Claudia's book during lunch, and she talks a lot about education, about Latinos, right? Their occupation, income, really important data that you should know when you look at this population. So let's talk about it a little bit. Let's see what the American Community Survey, which is our largest survey that we conduct in the U.S., is saying socioeconomically about this population. So let's go ahead and go. So as you can see here, we'll start with median age. Something that we really want to highlight is that you're going to see a variation of median age. It's true that Latinos are young. Despite my youthful looks, I've worked in 3 censuses, but it's true compared to the total population, the Hispanic population is very young. But there is a lot of variation among the detail groups here, countries of origin, ranging from Honduran at 26.9 years of median age all the way to the right, or Cuban and Uruguayan at 40. So just something to keep in mind as well, to highlight. Next slide, please. So one of the things I really want to highlight here is this. So on the left hand, if you're facing on your left-hand side the Hispanic origin, between 2010 and 22, looking at educational attainment, right? Percentage of Latinos who have less than a high school degree equivalent, or bachelor's degree. So instead of doing the classic, hey, let's compare Hispanics and non-Hispanics, let's do something different today. Let's think positively. Look what's happening in the Hispanic population. This is what's amazing. Look at the percentage of Latinos with a bachelor's degree, that little kind of like teal color. Back in 2010, about 13% of Latinos, all Latinos who were aged 25 years and over had a bachelor's degree. It went up about 7 percentage points, 20%. That's the positive, folks. It's changing. Getting more bachelor's degree. That's what's happening. All right, let's go to the quick slides more quickly here. And, we also want to highlight what's happening with the educational attainment among the detail groups as well. And yes, if you look on the left-hand side, the Mexican origin population has one of the lowest, about 15.8%. We need to do a little bit more better job on that. But as you can see, it does vary among all the different origins. Here you see Puerto Ricans, for example, at 23.7% with a bachelor's degree, all the way to the right with the Colombians at nearly 40%. So a lot of different variation there, something also to note and keep in mind as you address these different communities and how you are marketing to them, of course. Next slide, please. Also, I just want to highlight here, keeping it positive, left side, if you hear, where do you always hear about Hispanics? They're always working in what? Construction jobs, things like that, right? Well, I got some news for you. Back in 2010, about 19% of all Latinos were employed in management and business and sciences. Now it's 27%. So it's going up. So, yes, it's true, smaller, 27% in 2022, compared to 46% for the non-Hispanic population. We still double the size, but making improvements, slowly but surely, but it's happening. All right, next slide, please. Also, another, oops, that looks like it came in here a little bit, but that's okay. Here the point is that I want to just show you, there's also variation among all the different Latino groups as well, and the percentage of them that are working in management positions, service, sales, and et cetera. I wish I could be here all day with you to talk about all this, but I don't have all the time. But just to give you a little flavor of what's happening. Next slide, please. Okay, and then here I got about 2 more slides left to talk about median household income. Again, as you can see here, another positive note when you look at the, Hispanic but non-Hispanic, Hispanic in blue, back in 2010, the median household income was about $54,000, as you can see here, and by 2022 has gone up to $65,000, almost $66,000. So again, corresponding education levels going up, occupation, and what usually correlates with that is salaries and income. 1 minute, let's go. All right, one slide, I think I'm down, and here again, I'm not gonna go over all the slides, a little bit busy. I knew I was being very ambitious with all the data I wanted to show you, but that's okay, because we're here at the UN, and this is what we wanna do, right? So, median household income by the different origins, of course, and you can see a lot of variation. Colombians basically being one of the highest with the median household income. As you can see here, about $73,000 a year in 2022, okay? All right, and next slide. Okay, so if you'd like to know more and you wanna know more, please contact me. Here's my contact information. If you'd like to know more, we have a lot more wealth of data, and I'm also very happy to share this slide deck with you as well. So thank you, Claudia, again. Thank you for the opportunity.